Hi guys, the first part of doing this project is to set up your loom. This is the Adjustable Hat Loom by Knitting Board. And it comes in different pieces, and I have extra pieces off to my side because we're not going to be using them at this time. Make sure you keep the booklet that comes with it. It'll help you with setting up the loom to the size that you need for each time. Now again, it tells you what's included, what's considered our rounded parts, our peg rails, our connectors, and all that. So you want to keep this so you know what you're going to be needing for each project. And when you go inside, the first page tells you how you might want to, what size you want to do. We're going to do for medium, and again, that's for people with a head circumference of approximately 20 inches. So if you have a bigger head, you're going to want to set it up for a large, and right below it, it will tell you how to set it up. So for our medium, we're going to do a small gauge, so we're going to have 80 pegs. We're going to use 2 of the 9 peg rails, 4 of the connectors, and 2 rounded parts. So we got our rounded parts, our 9 rails, and our connectors. So let's go ahead and get them set up. Now, the first thing you need to notice is how there's like a ridge. See how there's a ridge? So when you set up, the first thing you do is put the first connector on. You want to make sure the ridges kind of match up, and go ahead and pop that in. Same way with the 9 rail that comes next. Go ahead, make sure the ridges line up, pop that in, and then pop in our next and last connector for this side. Again, making sure you got the ridge part on the outside. And go ahead and do the same thing to this other side, keeping in mind to make sure that your ridges are on the outside of that loom. Okay, so again, my ridges are here. They need to be on the outside towards it, so we're just going to connect it. Obviously, you can roll this right around to yours, looking at you, but I'm holding it up for the camera. But there's our ridges, and our last connector goes in there. If you have problems with your hands, unconnecting these could be tricky, so if you need to, make sure you ask for help. And then we put our last little circle, half circle on there, and they connect nicely together. That snap lets you know. So now we're all set up to do our hat using 80 pegs of the loom. And again, this is the space between the pegs that they're talking about. If you were using a bulkier yarn, you may want to skip every other peg or remove these gray pegs. But those can be a little difficult to remove, so I tend to just keep them on and just change up how I wrap depending on what yarn I'm using if I need to skip a peg due to the bulkiness. So again, this is all set up, and one other tip that we might want to do, which I probably will do in the next part, because this is kind of like the part 1, is as you notice, there's no real distinctive thing to tell you where the start of this loom is. Okay, when you're doing a nifty knitter, you use that little knobby, I call it, on the end or something. We don't have that. So you may want to either take a little painter's tape, a little like stitch marker or something, and figure out where you want your starting spot to be. So as you work in the round, you'll know when you get back to the beginning. So I'm going to probably use a stitch marker after, I'll get a stitch marker and place it where I want my beginning to be each time I go around, so that I can keep track of my rows. So that's just a little tip before we get started, is go find yourself something to decide where your starting point is. The first part is to actually do the cast on. I'm going to keep it really simple, and we're just going to use this light green color. It's actually kind of like a mint green. It looks a little darker on camera than it is actually in person. The other color I'm going to be using later on is this multicolor. It's kind of got some green, a little bit of blues, and some purples in it. So to keep it simple, again, I'm going to do the E-wrap cast on. You can choose to do a different cast on if you want. So we're just going to do our slip knot. And then what I decided to do is I have a stitch marker over here, just a simple yellow one. That's going to be where I start each round in, so I can keep track better of when I'm done with a row. You can choose a different method, like I mentioned earlier, to keep track of where your starting point is. So again, with the E-wrap cast on, you just simply place it on, tighten it up a little bit, and then you can work the tail that you got with it, and just work your way around. Wrap all the pegs. Oops, sorry, just one peg at a time. I'm going to wrap all the pegs. Remember, as you wrap, to kind of keep it a little gentle, don't tug too hard or it'll make it hard to knit over. And you're going to work your way back to the beginning. And again, with E-wrap knit, all you're going to do is wrap that starting peg again. I just lost it. Let me go back. I knew that would happen. Alright, let's just go back and rewrap here. Accidents happen. Okay, again, we're back to the beginning. As you can see, I got my little stitch marker. I'm going to wrap this and I'm going to lock it in by knitting it over. And then go around again this time, E-wrap knit, and knit it over. It's easier if you kind of push these down before you get going, just so you don't have to worry about pushing them down as you go. So kind of push that yarn you already have on there down to the bottom. Again, just go ahead and make sure I'm on the right one here. Just go ahead and wrap. You can work a few pegs at a time if you want. Which is sometimes easier if you work a few at a section at a time. Or you can choose to wrap the whole loom. But again, as you saw when my yarn unwound, it's sometimes easier just to start in sections. And again, all I'm doing is after I wrap it, I'm just taking the bottom loop up over the top for our E-wrap cast on. And I'm going to continue this till I get back to my starting point. And if it frays, just because it's an older yarn, just make sure you grab it all. So okay, I'm going to continue this all the way around the loom until I get back to my starting point, and then we'll move on. And then as you get back to the beginning, we just got the last little peg here to do before we start our new row. Now what we're going to do, because we're going to have a small brim, is I want to do just the purl stitch. And again, what the purl stitch is you take your yarn and you'll place it under the working yarn that's on there, the loop that's on there, and you're going to go ahead and you're going to bring your tool through the loop, put the working yarn underneath it, turn it, bring it up to create a new loop, take the old loop off, put that new loop on, give it a little tug. And we're going to be able to weave in these ends later, so don't worry about the ends we had from when we attached it to the peg. So we just take it and go through our loop, put the working yarn underneath it, turn it, bring it up, and we'll do the purl stitch. Go ahead and continue this around the loom, and you're actually going to do this many rows of the purl stitch before we move on to the next step. Okay, so I'm just kind of tuck this one on the inside because that's kind of freaking me, that's bug in my way here. So just push that on the inside, and again, I'm just going to continue doing the purl stitch around the loom. And we'll move on to the next step. After completing the 10 rows, you should look like this. And it's already curling, which is fine because this is going to be our brim. And now what we have to do is we have to find the original loops, excuse me, and we're going to replace them back on each peg so that we can make this our brim. So I'm going to zoom in here so you can see what I'm doing. Starting at the first peg, you're going to go and you're going to try to find your first stitch. If you got the straggler from before, you can kind of hide it in the project. Now you may not be able to get them to line up perfectly, but you want to do your best and make sure your working yarn is kind of out of the way for when you go around again. But you're just going to find a loop and place it on. Go to the next peg and find another new loop and place it on. And sometimes they'll even follow themselves, and you're just going to work yourself around trying to find the next new loop that you can put on there. Sometimes you may have to have one peg share a loop. Excuse me, it just depends on if you can find the original ones. But that's all I'm doing, is I'm looking for the next loop from my beginner and just kind of going and placing them on there. You could choose to knit it off now, but I'm going to wait until I get them all back on there just to make sure that I have enough, or that I lined it up right in case I need to adjust anything. So again, you're just looking for the next loop. When you're looking at the beginner row, you're looking for the next loop and placing it on. And again, this is how we do. And again, this is how you're going to do the brim. You're just going to simply, like, again, keep going around, going to the first row of stitches from your cast on row, grabbing the next loop and placing it on. And if you notice you don't get all of it, make sure you get all the loop and place it on. So I'm going to go around and I'm going to find all my loops and get them on there, and then we'll move on to knitting this over. So once you do this, what I want you to do is, after you get all the beginner row loops back on your pegs, I want you to then go ahead and simply knit over. So you're going to go back to your starting point and you're just going to knit over to lock the brim in place. So again, go ahead, finish doing the brim, finish putting your loops back on the pegs, and then go ahead and immediately go around and knit them over before we move on to the next part. I'm just finishing up the last few pegs of knitting the brim over to lock it in place. Okay, and that's our last one right here. Now our brim is all locked into place, so go ahead and kind of push that down. This will give us a nice little skinny brim. Excuse me. Now what we want to do is we want to move on to the next excuse me, part. And what we're going to do is we're going to still keep it in the green for now. Later we'll be switching over to the other color that I showed you. We're going to go ahead and we're going to do, excuse me, the figure 8 stitch. And we're going to do that for this many rows right there. And so let's go ahead. And what you're going to do is you have your yarn coming out. You're coming out of the starter peg, of the start peg, and you come around the two, around, behind the other, around, like that, and then you knit over. So again, you're going to come out from your peg, come around, okay, and go to the front, oops, sorry, around the back, then around the front, back to the back again, and around the other peg. Wow. There we go. Okay. And that's just how you do the figure 8 stitch. I do have a video on the figure 8 stitch, so if you need to, you can go check that out and practice with it that way as well. So again, coming out, go over, around this peg, to the back of the one before, around. Basically you're making like an 8. Okay. That's all you're going to do is work this around. For the amount of rows that I told you a minute ago. So again, keep working this figure 8 stitch in the round for that many rows right here, and that counts the one we're doing right now. So do a total of that many rows of the figure 8, and then we'll come back and we'll switch our colors. After completing the 4 rows, we're going to get ready to switch our colors. It's a little hard to see as it's coming down through, but again, this is for a summer or spring type hat, so I'm not going for warmth as much as I'm going for a little bit of style. But I love how the figure 8 stitch kind of works up. But now we want to switch from this color over to our next color, which again is the multicolored of like the greens, the blues, and the purples. And I found the thing that went with it, and it was a Red Heart Super Saver yarn. It's a weight of 4, and it says it's watercolor. However, I do not know if this kind is still available. This was gifted to me quite a few years ago, so it may not still be available, but again, it was called a watercolor one, so you might be able to find something similar to it. Now, all I ever do when I switch colors, I just cut from the one I have and attach the new one. So I did my last figure 8, and when I did my last figure 8, my working yarn would come off this last peg, so I can start my new row. So what you're going to do now is you're going to cut the working yarn, leaving a little bit of a tail, and then you're just going to simply take your new yarn and attach it to that. You're going to want to attach it kind of close if you can, so that way it will immediately take over the new color, so you're just going to go in here and you're just going to tie it. That's all I usually do is tie it. Some people might have other methods. If you know other methods that you like better, you can always comment down below with the method. But I just tied it onto the new to the old, basically. Give it a little tug, and I can hold these to work them in, and later I can weave in the ends that are in my way. Now we're going to switch over what we're going to do. Let me just back up here a little bit. So again, we have our working tails here. We can hold them all together. Later you can hide them into the project or weave. And we're just going to make it simple, we're going to do, excuse me, we're going to do just a couple rows of just a plain E-wrap before we move into the different stitch I want to do. This will help kind of loosen these stitches up a little bit as we're working. So again, we're just going to take all of the yarn and we're just going to wrap it around. Again, you'll weave in the ends later. And we're just going to do like an E-wrap knit. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to E-wrap knit, making sure you wrap every peg. As you tell, I missed one. Go ahead and do the E-wrap knit. So you wrap the pegs and then you're going to knit over. If you want to, because you did a different stitch, you can easily go ahead and work in sections, which is sometimes what I advise to do, just to kind of keep your tension right. But again, when you did a figure 8, it's going to be a little snugger. And then we're just going to go ahead and work our way around doing the E-wrap knit. Just like I said, it helps loosen up the stitches below for the next part. For the next part, we're going to just simply do purling for 2 rows. We're going to go again with purling. You're going down through your loop, bringing your working yarn over, turning it to create a new loop, and then taking that new loop and removing the old loop and putting the new loop on the peg. So again, we're going over here, putting our working tool through, moving our working yarn over, turning and making a new loop. Take the old loop and put it on the new, or put the new loop on the peg after taking out the old. And again, we're going to work this around the loom. So continue with this purl stitch for this many rows, and then we'll move on to the next part. After completing the 2 rows of purl, you should see the product again working its way down through, and what I like is you're starting to see the other color that we attached to it. Now we're going to go back to doing the figure 8 stitch, and again, all we're doing with the figure 8 stitch, we zoom in here, where's my starting, here we go, is we're just going around oops, gotta go this way, sorry, around the back, around the front, around the back, around the front, and then you're just going ahead and you're knitting over. And just remember, that's my stitch marker. Just let me know when I'm starting a new row. So I do get caught up in it every now and then. But again, the figure 8 stitch, we're just going behind the next 2 pegs, around front of one, behind the other, back around the front, like we did before. And go ahead and continue the figure 8 stitch for this many rows. This number also includes the row we're going to be doing right now, or the row that you're going to be finishing off right now. So again, do the figure 8 stitch for this many rows, and then we'll go on to the next step. After completing the 10 rows of the figure 8 stitch, the hat should begin to look like this. Again, we got our first little ridge that we did a purl, and our figure 8 here, and our figure 8 here. Excuse me. And of course we got our nice little thinner brim. Now what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to doing the purl stitch, and we're going to continue that stitch until it's time to take the hat off. And again, we're going to do the purl stitch for this many rows right here until we reach the end. But I just really like the way it's coming out with the colors. Again, that was a watercolor color that we had used for this part in here, and this was just our light green. So again, I'm just going to continue going on to the purl stitch until we get to the end of the hat. But I like that we have this nice little ridge from when we did the purl stitch before. So again, if you're going to purl, it's very simple. Like we did before, you're just going to do the working yarn underneath of your peg and then just create that new loop. So you can go through the loop, put the working yarn underneath it, turn it to create that new loop. Take the old loop off and put the new loop on. So again, we're just going to go right back to doing the purl stitch for this amount of rows right there until we get ready to take the hat off the loom. After completing 15 rows of the purl stitch, we're ready to take this hat off the loom. As you can see, we've got our nice figure 8 and brim, the ridge, back to the figure 8, and now this is just the purl that we did. We're going to use the gathered bind off, which you typically use in hats. So that means we're going to cut our working yarn, leaving a tail. I usually say, maybe 5 or 6 inches to get yourself a tail. Now you're going to need to cut as part of a separate piece of yarn. I usually say you want to make sure you have more than enough. So again, go about maybe 2 feet or a little more because you're going to work around and you really don't want to get to the end and not have enough. Just go to the one end, kind of hold it with the one that you have, and if you want to, I just thought of this idea, you could take something like a clip if you wanted and kind of squeeze those together so that it keeps those two together as you're working the yarn around. So that'll kind of keep it snug. So if you can, you might be able to use that. And then you're going to take the other part of the yarn, and again, like I tried to do before, go ahead and work it through the loops. So you're going to bring it up, go through the loops, grab it. It's really hard to do for some reason between the camera here. Alright, let's try this again. So we're going to go through the loop, grab our working yarn that we have the new loop on, and pull it all the way through. Go the next, do the same thing. Put the working yarn under there. Pull it all the way through. Go the next and do the same thing, pulling it all the way through. Now after you work a few pegs, again, make sure you don't lose that tail, the one that we're using. So if you have the clip that can kind of keep those secured together, that's great. If not, you're going to want to keep an eye on it. But after you do a few pegs, you can go ahead and gently remove those loops off the peg if you want. Again, keeping on that you don't lose the 2 strands here. So again, you're going to continue going around the loom like this until you get to the end point. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to go off camera, and I'm just going to keep working this around until I get back to the end to do the final part of the gathered bind off. We're on the last couple here that we have to do. Again, the clip is really nice. It's keeping the yarns that we need set aside in a good place here. And we're just going to finish up doing these last bit of loops. And you go through this last loop here. Okay, now go ahead, gently take them off completely. Move your loom away. And now what you have to do is we have to close this off. What I'm going to do is I'm going to cut, because I have so much extra tail left, I'm going to give that a little snip just so I don't have to deal with as much when I'm closing it off. Okay, and then we can undo our clip here. And we want, this is the outside, so you want to flip it around to the inside before you close it off. And then basically grabbing all your tails that you have here, you're going to gently pull. To close it off. And it's kind of curling, so I'm just kind of helping it work its around so it's not so curled. And you're just going to kind of pull your yarns till you get them as closed as you can. If you wanted to turn this into a ponytail hat, you wouldn't close it off all the way. You would just kind of stop it and tie it and leave yourself the hole if you want to use this as a ponytail pattern. Now once you feel you got it closed off as much as you can, as much as it's going to work, go ahead and tie these strands together. But again, it's not as closed off as you want. If you can see any gap, and that's where a crochet hook will come in, and you can kind of go to the opposite side and go into a stitch like that. Bring over some of this working tail over, put it through, and what that's going to do is going to help close it, and then you can put another knot. So you can kind of work around this hole, getting it closed off as fully as you want. So again, you look and say, okay, I want to put one over here so that it will close on this side. Bring your yarn through. Okay. And then tie it again. So again, just kind of work it around until you get it completely closed off. This time I'm going to do one over here. And I'm going to take this over here. And I'm going to tie it. So just kind of work around until you get it to close off the hole as much as you would want. And once you get it to the way, the hole is closed off as much as you would like, then just go ahead and trim your tails. I'm just making sure I've got it closed off. If I want to do any more, I want to be able to do it now instead of later. So you're just working into a stitch, and then you're just tying it. Again, once you get it exactly the closed off as you want, so I'm checking for here. Once you got it as closed off as you want it to be, so I'm just checking it to make sure. Okay, we got a little gap over here, so I'm going to close this off. Okay, once as much as you want, do one more double knot in that same spot. Trim your tails. You can always leave a little extra just in case you do need to go back and do any more. So I'm going to leave this like this just to make sure. And then if I'm all set and I don't need to do anything else, I will trim them even more. But then we can go ahead, we can turn it back. Just drop my tool back the way it was. And we've got our cute little spring type hat. And again, any stragglers you have, you can go ahead and weave them into the project with your crochet hook. And again, nice cute little hat for spring.